It started. There we go.
So
Okay.
thank you very much, James. So good afternoon, everybody, and goedemiddag, Ruud. Great to have another Dutchman here in the University of Reading's Rose's set of seminars. I certainly have enjoyed what I've seen of this set of seminars very much. I'm a football fan. I like sports generally, but I'm a football fan. But to see it through the lens of economics and what is possible and is absolutely fascinating. Now, Ruud works at the University of Groningen. I'm not sure, because you're from Amsterdam area as well, Ruud. Who are you supporting in Holland?
I was in Amsterdam in the mid-90s, and so I saw the first stint of Van Gaal, and I attended the Champions League final in Vienna.
Right. So we all, our credibility is no longer determined by titles and a number of publications, but the kind of football matches you have seen in your life. So I know you're not coming here for me. You come here to listen to Ruud. I already had to try and influence him to get the right results for my teams. But Ruud, fascinating to hear an economics perspective on how do we wind up the leagues in this bizarre time of COVID-19. Over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. So first, let me try to share Rose's seminar screen. Okay. So I started working on this, and then it turned out that James, we started emailing and was working on the same thing. So now we are collaborating on models to finish the leagues. But let me be straightforward, honest right away. I made these transparency, so if there's anything you don't like, it's me you don't like, and not James's work at this moment. So the focus will be, for that reason, mainly on the Dutch league and not on the English Premier League. So, well, this is the plan, introduction, background. We do a bit of modeling. We simulate what could happen, and we end up with some conclusions regarding this approach. So, well, this COVID-19 pandemic has a huge influence on each and everything, and well, depending on your point of view, one of the most most important, semi-important things such as soccer is also affected. So the leagues, most sport leagues, or as far as I know, almost all sports leagues have been suspended. And at this moment, it is not clear whether the season will be finished in different leagues. So, well, this is work in progress, and as a consequence, we are, the events overtake us in a way, because you must have read that now the French league is indefinitely suspended as well. So anyway, as a consequence, the final ranking of these leagues that are suspended is not determined, and and the final ranking is important. It determines the champion of the league, the champion of the season, who gets to play international games, who gets relegated, and besides these sportive outcomes, the final ranking is also an important determinant of the distribution of television revenues. So in that sense, final rankings are important as well. So from all these different perspectives, it is of interest to extrapolate the ranking to what could have been the likely final ranking, the likely title winner, the likely teams that would likely have been relegated. So we estimate the probability distribution of the final rankings, conditional obviously on the observed match outcomes so far. So even though we limit ourselves to professional soccer in the main leagues, we have results for England, France, Germany, Italy, Netherlands, and Spain. The methodology can be used for amateur leagues. It can be used for handball or different sports. So in that sense, it is broadly applicable. So we have two questions. Which team is the team that would most likely win the title? And which team is most likely the runner-up? And can we say something about which matches contribute to resolving any uncertainty about the title? And in fact, the results in this presentation relate to Netherlands in detail, and England and France in some lesser detail. But results for Germany and Italy and Spain are straightforward and can be incorporated. So the forecasting exercise of the end of season outcomes is not completely trivial, because there's 74 matches to be played in the Dutch league, and yeah, we have to simulate those in a reasonable way, one way or another. And then in the literature, different methods have been proposed to predict these match outcomes that we need. Well, there's a working paper that shows that the relation even between the qualitative match outcome, home win, draw, loss, and the score line is complicated. Godard evaluates different methods for forecasting both the score lines and the match outcomes. And we take a relatively simple approach, but in our approach we allow for grouping of teams. It is easy to claim that, say, FC Groningen is a better team than Heerenveen, but well, beauty is in the eye of the beholder and the soccer fan, I guess. So we allow teams to be identical in a certain way, and I will explain that in some more detail later. So the score lines are important in the case of the Netherlands, because in the current ranking, Ajax is leading the league and AZ Alkmaar is second, and the difference is based only on goal difference. So even goal difference makes an important distinction here. So that is why that cannot be ignored. So far for the introduction, then some background, if it... Yes. Okay, the timeline. Sunday, 8 March was the last match, FC Groningen PSV. And at that moment, the audience was advised not to physically contact each other. Don't shake hands, sneeze in your elbow, give a foot shake if you want. Then on the 12th of March, the government announced the first set of measures. No events with more than 100 people. And then on Friday, the 13th of March, what's in the date? ADO Den Haag Fortuna Sittard was the first game that was going to be cancelled. And yeah, in the consecutive weeks, the Soccer Association KNVB discussed options how to resume the league, noting that soccer matches are not events. So there was, I think, a bit of misunderstanding, because the word event has a specific meaning. And then on the 23rd of March, government announced a targeted lockdown. So no groups larger than 2 in the public space, no events until 28th of April. And then after the press conference of the Prime Minister, a journalist asked the question, does this apply to professional soccer? And then the Prime Minister said, yes, it applies to professional soccer, because professional soccer matches are events. And I think what he means by events are events that require permission from public authorities. So if you organize an event with enough people, you need to get permission from public authorities, and that public authority is the mayor of the village where the game is played. So if the mayor says, I do not give permission, usually for public safety reasons, then the match is not going to be played. So in the end, the mayor of a city is the ultimate decision maker whether or not matches can be played. So in that sense, these events require formal permission, and the Prime Minister clarified that point of view. Then later, targeted lockdown until the 24th of May, no events until 1 September. And then we didn't have to wait until the question and answers after the press conference, because in the press conference itself, the Prime Minister said explicitly, this means no professional soccer until 1 September. So clear. And then that was, then it was clear to each and everyone that there would be no resuming of the league, the Dutch Eredivisie. So the Soccer Association had to decide what to do with the Eredivisie, what to do, how to extrapolate the rankings. And there are many ways to determine a final ranking. So different suggestions have been proposed, of course. And the current ranking, that is the simplest one, I guess. You could use, for some time there was hope to play remaining matches on neutral venues without spectators. But the fact that if you don't have spectators, and this has been the argument of the mayors who were very much against organizing these matches. If you play a match without spectators, spectators will come outside. The fans will meet outside. If they're friendly to each other, they will happily chat with each other. If they're unfriendly with each other, they will fight outside the stadium. And if they think it is too far to travel, then they may collectively decide to watch the match in a bar, or if the bar is closed, at a house of someone. So this idea that you can have no group gatherings and still have soccer matches on neutral venue is very hard to reconcile with the observed behavior of soccer fans. So this is mandate. You can play the remaining matches without spectators in the home stadium. Same problems, I guess. You could play the remaining matches using e-games, and this FIFA game. That's not taken too seriously, but I guess it's one option to do that. And finally, a slightly more serious suggestion has been to play the remaining matches only through a penalty series. Because in a penalty series, there's 1.5 meter distance between the player and the goalkeeper. So in that sense, that is reasonable. In that sense, that is reasonable. But still, this audience or non-audience problem remains. So this has not been implemented yet. Now, the UEFA requires, so first, at the very beginning, the UEFA was very adamant that soccer leagues should resume, and otherwise the leagues could not register their teams to the Champions League and Europa League next season. Now, later, the UEFA toned down a little bit, and it now requires best efforts to complete the domestic competitions. But it understands that an official order prohibiting sport events would also apply to soccer. So then, or specific economic or financial reasons may make it impossible to complete the domestic league. So then they say, well, okay, if these events occur, then we understand that there will be no full season. Then there has to be a transparent procedure to determine the title winner or the champion, and distribution of the tickets for the European competitions. So those are some possibilities. Then, one possibility that has not, that's obviously not mentioned explicitly, that is this the simulation modeling. But the journalist in the Times made his perception of our work quite clear. So you see, there's been a study about home advantage through multivariate Poisson regression analysis of goals scored, and then in parentheses, no, me neither. So that is not transparent. That apparently they don't understand that. So I think that what the procedure that we discuss in this paper is useful. It can give some insights, but it is it's a bit optimistic to assume that it will be used right away. So that is then the spoiler. So then the Dutch Soccer Association had to make a decision, and they did. So first decision, no title awarded. So even though Ajax is leading the league on goal difference, there's no title awarded. But the current ranking is going to be used to distribute the European tickets. So that means that Ajax gets the group ticket to the Champions League, Alkmaar, AZ Alkmaar, qualification stage Champions League, whatever that may mean in this current situation. Feyenoord goes directly to the group stage Europa League, and PSV Willem II to qualification Europa League, provided the UEFA accept these registrations. That is still not clear. There's no promotion or relegation. There's no cup final, and the winner of the cup final gets automatically entered into the Europa League. That is the ticket that Feyenoord is getting in bullet 2. So Feyenoord could win that ticket through winning the cup final. Or Utrecht could win that ticket through winning the cup final. But there's no cup final. And then for the women, basically similar procedure for the women competitions. So this is the decision, and the most contentious element of this decision, well, obviously Alkmaar is not too happy because they are only second on goal difference, so they feel that they're also entitled to the Champions League, to the group stage. But the big contention is this no promotion or relegation. So the losers are Alkmaar, because they're second only due to goal difference. FC Utrecht, team is 6th in the current ranking, so it falls just outside the Europa League tickets, but it is one match short. If it would win that match, it would be 5th. So then it would take that place of Willem II, and it could play in the Europa League. Then two teams are extremely upset. That is Cambuur and the Graafschap. Those are two teams, 1 and 2 in the second league in the Netherlands. So they were hoping for promotion. And considering the ranking in that league, it is very reasonable that they hope for promotion. And the big winners are ADO Den Haag and RKC, who avoid direct relegation. So many people think that this is very unfair, that there is no promotion relegation. So how did this decision come about? Well, the Soccer Association organized a video conference call to gauge support, or to see what the teams were thinking. So there were 16 teams in favor of promotion and relegation, 16 professional teams. So you can, it's easy to guess that these 16 teams are mainly from the Keukenkampioen divisie, from the league that would benefit from promotion. There were 9 teams were against this promotion relegation idea, and there were 9 abstentions. So the Soccer Association interpreted this vote, or this expression of opinions, if you want, because it was not a formal vote. You can interpret this as 16 in favor of promotion relegation, 9 against, so there should be promotion relegation. That's option 1. Option 2 is what the Dutch Soccer Association did. They counted the abstentions as votes against promotion relegation. So now they say, it was not clear. There were 16 teams in favor of promotion relegation, 18 teams were not in favor of promotion relegation, so there's no promotion relegation. No, so this is an opaque procedure, very intransparent, but that is not covered by this UEFA guideline that requires transparency in determining the final ranking. Promotion relegation is under the authority of the domestic leagues. So it's up to the English leagues to decide themselves how they arrange promotion relegation. It is not up to themselves how they decide who to register for the Champions League next season or the Europa League next season, because UEFA has to accept these registrations. Now, so that is so obviously this Cambuur and the Graafschap are extremely upset about this, and indeed I think next week there will be the first court case where they contest this decision by the Dutch Soccer Association. Then finally, the Soccer Association appeals to the teams playing in the European leagues to give up part of their starting fee, and they cite solidarity. So that is mainly an appeal to Ajax that gets automatic qualification to the group stage in the Champions League, and well, they're supposed to cough up a bit. Now, what is the economic impact more from an abstract point of view? Winners, losers of this whole procedure? Well, the producers, the teams, are in deep trouble. And most costs for the soccer teams are fixed. That is, they do not vary much with the number of matches played. But the revenues, one-off tickets, broadcasting, in some cases, match-specific sponsoring, merchandising, that is all quite variable. That varies with the number of matches played. Television loses content, so they lose. The stadium consumers lose because the season ticket holders are denied 4 or 5 home games. Even though they paid for that, the television consumers lose because there are no matches, but at least they have the ability to cancel the subscriptions. And then the players also lose because they don't train, they don't play, so they don't develop human capital. There's reduced transfer activity, and young players may drop out of professional soccer altogether. So in that sense, the economic impact is significant. The Soccer Association has appealed to the government for support, 300-400 million euros. So to give you order of magnitude, KLM, the Dutch airline company, has asked for support for 4 billion euros. So this is 10% of the support requested by KLM. Well, I can make a small ballpark estimate, and you will see that that's not, that is reasonable, that there's many millions being lost. A particular contentious issue is, of course, the broadcasting rights. In France, the broadcasting rights are changing in the summer. So the existing contract holder does not have much incentive to keep good relations in that sense. So they've paid only for the matches that have been paid. In the Premier League and in the Serie A, the last term of the contract has not been paid. In Belgium, in Germany, and in the Netherlands, the last term of the contract has been paid. So that matters a lot for these teams. Season ticket holders, that is an they are their position is not very clear. So there's been a longer term decline of season ticket demand in Netherlands. And if there's going to be counterparty risk, that the decline will accelerate. So this crisis may have long-term consequences on the stability. And season ticket holders are usually loyal fans who buy their tickets and renew usually. So that's an important source of income for the teams in Netherlands. And from personal point of view, I had renewed my FC Groningen season ticket, not for 1 year, but for 5 years, 2 days before the lockdown. And I also paid for it. So at this moment, I'm waiting to hear from the team what they will do. Okay, current status of the leagues. You see the number of teams, date of the last match that has been played, and the number of matches left. I think ballpark figure in most cases would be 25% of the season is yet to be played. In Italy, more. So that is a significant amount, 25%. And typically, matches in the second half of the season are better visited by paying fans than in the first half of the season. So also in that sense, this is really a big problem for these different leagues. So now, how do we extrapolate the current rankings? So in the case of the Netherlands, based on the 232 matches that have been played, to the probability distribution of the matches of the final ranking. So first, well, if you have match results, you can calculate the ranking based on the match results. So in a sense, the ranking is nothing more than a function of 306 variables indicating the individual match results. That's equation 1. And well, the argument of that function h is partly unknown. So because it's probably better to talk about the probability distribution of the final ranking. And we need to derive the probability distribution of the last 74 matches. So those are the matches to be played, because the other matches are known, and that is what we have to calculate, that probability distribution. And that is well, complex, a lot of work. It is not a simple probability distribution, so the easier thing is to do this by simulation. So we simulate possible results for the remaining matches, for the unobserved matches that have not been played. You fill that in, and then you get one possible outcome of the final ranking. And then again, you simulate possible outcomes for the 74 matches that remain to be played, and you have a second outcome of final ranking. You do that many times, that gives you a pretty good idea what is the likely final ranking, which teams are expected to be in the top, which teams are expected to be in the bottom. Now, that is so that's the plan, that's the methodology. Then we need to know the 74-dimensional probability distribution of all matches, and obviously, that needs to be simplified a little bit. So we assume independence. The match between one match is independent of the outcome of another match. So we, for that reason, we need a probability model for match outcomes, just for one match. And then using that particular probability distribution, we can find a distribution for the outcome of rankings. Now, so what do? I do an ordered logit model for match outcomes. So that tells you, suppose Ajax plays a home game against Willem II. We know the strength of Ajax, we know the strength of Willem II. Then that tells you the probability that Ajax wins. It's a home game is 60%. Probability of a draw is 20%, and probability of an away win is 20% as well. But that gives you only the qualitative outcome, the probability distribution of the qualitative outcome. And then in the second step, if Ajax were to win that match, we draw from the observed home wins, the score lines corresponding to observed home wins. If Ajax is expected to play a draw, we draw a realized draw from the observed draws, and the same for away wins. So in a way, the score lines correspond to the observed score lines earlier in the season. Now that is that way we kind of deal with this issue that they are difficult to predict. So this is the ordered logit model. It is well, richly parameterized, many parameters. So you have a team match between two teams, R and S. S is the away team, R is the home team. Where you see the probability of a home win depends on quality difference. Quality difference here. And delta R, delta subscript R, is the measure for home advantage of team R. So that will be the home advantage of Ajax. Then we also see that the outcome, the probability of the home win, depends on the difference in quality. So if this difference in quality is large, theta R is much larger than theta S, then this is a large number. And then this probability becomes large. So the thetas and the deltas measure some things. Thetas measure quality, deltas measure home advantage, and the C calibrates draws and allows for draws. So the many parameters that you have to estimate. One remark, to estimate, to identify the model, we need a centering constraint. So the popular centering constraint is that the sum of all the thetas, the sum of all the qualities is 0. So that means that average quality is 0. So the theta parameters would then measure quality compared to a hypothetical team of average quality 0. So a positive theta means that you're better than average. A negative theta means that you are worse than average. So that is then the procedure. The problem is that there are many parameters. So there are L delta parameters because there are L teams. So that's 18 teams. There are L minus 1 theta quality parameters. L minus 1 because of this centering constraint. So and there's 1C, so that's in total 2 times L parameters. So 36 parameters, for 232 matches observed. So that is like 6-7 observations per parameter. So that is way too much parameters compared to the number of observations. So if you use this for prediction, I would be afraid that you use a lot of noise, that you predict on a bit too much noise. So we follow the work by Schauberger and Toets. They say, well, you should penalize. So you should take parameters only into account if they're really different from other parameters. Now, so that is what is happening here. So home advantage, everybody has it, but the differences should not be exaggerated. So you want to give Ajax different home advantage from Feyenoord only if the difference of the home advantage is really different from the home advantage from Feyenoord, and it should not be a very small difference. So that is the first penalization. Second is quality. So that is already normalized. So you want the thetas. Basically, the average quality is 0. So you want to give only large deviations from quality proper value. So that is what is happening. So that's what we do. So this allows us to group the observations. So the criterion function to be maximized is the usual log likelihood function plus these 2 penalization terms that basically reduce the number of parameters. And this lambda that does the weighing in the penalization is based on cross-validation. So based on the observed 232 matches, we take subsamples, we estimate the model, we predict the model, predict with the model, and then we choose a lambda such that the predictions are as precise as possible. So that is how we get to lambda. So that is based on cross-validation. So the model estimates clusters of teams with similar delta, similar home advantage, and similar quality parameters. Now, so then you get this. So this is the output of the model. On the horizontal axis, you see lambda. So if you penalize a lot, then differences of the theta parameters from 0 is penalized a lot. So you don't want that. That doesn't help the objective function. So for that reason, you find estimates of 0. If the lambda is very small, you don't penalize, and that is like estimating this model with usual maximum likelihood. Well, the point estimates are given. So the ones on the left-hand side are the point estimates of regular ordered logit with no penalization, and the optimal weighing parameter lambda is the gray vertical line. So that is the log of lambda plus 1 approximately 0.6. So I've made it a bit easier to see. So this is the preferred model. And in this preferred model, you see that there is one very bad team. That is Waalwijk, RKC. So you see that the parameter, the theta on the vertical axis is negative, large and negative. Then there's another bad team, that is ADO. And then there's a cluster VVV, Twente, PEC, and Fortuna Sittard. So this model says that basically the quality parameter of those 4 teams cannot be distinguished very well from each other. There is a cluster Heerenveen, Heracles, Groningen, Emmen. There's a cluster Willem II, Vitesse, Utrecht. And on top there's a cluster PSV, Feyenoord. And they have slightly lower quality than AZ Alkmaar and Ajax. So that is how this grouping works. Then using the output of this The output of this model, we can generate probabilities. One remark about the setup of the simulation. Basically, you need many replications, so it's computationally quite intensive to get the point estimates with any degree of precision. Then this is the outcome for the Dutch league with these parameters. So on the horizontal axis, you see the position. On the vertical axis, you see the teams. See that the top team and the vertical axis is ranked according to the current ranking. You see that Ajax ends on P1, position 1, with 52%, and on position 2 with 37%. AZ is currently ranked 2, wins the title with probability 42%, and remains on second place with probability 42%. So that's a very, very close race. Well, that's not surprising because at this very moment, they are tied for the first place and separated only by goal difference. Then you see next cluster of teams, Feyenoord PSV, a third cluster of teams. And on the bottom, you see that with probability 97%, this RKC Waalwijk would be relegated. And with probability 84%, ADO Den Haag would be relegated because positions 17 and 18 are the two positions that imply direct relegation. Now that is so basically this says this difference between Ajax and AZ suggests that the remaining program, the remaining matches of Ajax are slightly simpler than the remaining matches of AZ. And because AZ has a low probability and they do not overtake Ajax. You also see that Willem II is with probability 64% keeps their fifth place. So in that sense, Utrecht's luck would only be for winning the cup final if they wanted to qualify. So there's uncertainty on the top of the ranking and no uncertainty at the bottom of the ranking. So using this, you could argue that ADO and RKC should have been relegated. Now let's look at another result, France. Well, in France, the results on the top are very clear. Paris Saint-Germain wins the title. Olympique Marseille, I think that must be OLM, is second. And it's also clear that Toulouse is directly relegated. And then finally, results for England. Well, Manchester, Liverpool, Manchester, Leicester. And then in England, there's some more uncertainty about relegation places. So if anything, relegation is more interesting from a sportive point of view than the title race at this moment. Then, well, also, we looked on a bit to match significance. So you can see here the probability that Ajax wins the title, conditional on the remaining match results. The remaining match results are horizontal. You see first match is Ajax Twente. Well, if Ajax wins that match, that is a home match. If Ajax wins that match, that doesn't do too much for their title probability. But there's a match against Emmen. It's an away match. If Ajax wins that particular match, it helps them a lot to improve their title win probability. So the implication is that the estimated probability suggests that Emmen is a tough opponent, and it is a tough opponent because it has a huge home advantage. So Ajax is not expected to win there. It's expected to lose points there. So if you win there, that's kind of an unexpected result, and it helps a lot in the title race. Well, then the same thing you can do. The probability that Ajax wins the title conditional on the remaining match result of AZ, the team that is second at this moment. Well, if you look at the first points, that is Groningen and AZ. If AZ, if AZ were to lose that match, then that helps Ajax a lot in their title race. So that is the interpretation here. So using this simulation results, you can identify interesting and more interesting matches that could be useful if the number of matches is restricted. Conclusions, well, there's a significant impact of the corona crisis and the suspension of the leagues on the financial performances of leagues and teams. So we've sketched a simulation approach, can be used to argue, to motivate decisions, and certainly divide any collective revenue if there's any left. And there's significant variation between countries. There's a tight title race in the Netherlands, a clear promotion relegation. But in England, Liverpool is without much contention, the title winner, and so is Paris Saint-Germain in France. They're miles ahead. Things James and I are working on at this moment. How robust are these results under different probability models? Match significance, I want to do a bit more on that. And well, the point estimates that we used in this approach are all based on regular home and away. We use this home advantage parameter. But maybe it is possible to find out probability distribution if there will be no spectators. So home advantage would be reduced. So that is something to be made more precise. Then finally, there's a bit of an open question. From Wikipedia, I've downloaded this graph. This is the number of corona infections per 1 million inhabitants. And I see that the Netherlands is dark red and France is dark red. There the leagues have been suspended indefinitely. In Belgium, I think the league is going to be suspended indefinitely. But I think that England, Spain, Italy, have the same dark red color, so I've yet to see that the plans to restart the league will materialize, or that the public health concerns, as voiced by the mayor of Liverpool the other day, will take a more important weight. So that's it. So at this moment I'm at the mercy of James, because I don't have the chat window. So James can tell me anything that he thinks is appropriate.
Yeah, thank you, Ruud. Really good, really interesting talk. Let me just track back through. Craig Teal asked, made a point that everyone's concerned about the places, the European places, which is a big part of the big debate. You mentioned earlier on in the talk about how relegations are an internal issue, that the European issues are the ones that are external, and therefore UEFA comes in and makes pronouncements regarding them. It almost leads you to think that perhaps the sensible option here is for UEFA to think about alternative ways for teams to qualify, or alternative formats for European competitions next year, or maybe even dispensing with them. There's talk, obviously, of the international calendar not returning back to normal in terms of international football for a number of years, and international travel looking as difficult as it is, perhaps. That's something that's going to be an issue. So maybe UEFA ought to think about its competitions, given that they're the complicating factor in many of these discussions.
Yes, I think that's a very fair point. But UEFA has made it well interesting for the soccer consumers, but more difficult for themselves by having the group structure. If they for one season would go back to a standard elimination tournament, you can accommodate many teams because you lose half of them in every round. So that would be an alternative to this. For 1 year, don't do the group structure because that makes many matches necessary.
Yep. Dennis wanted to just check that the way in which you were identifying the home advantage was distinct from team quality. So there's a separate parameter in your model for home advantage. Is that right?
Yes, 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 yes. Yes, it is just identified. It is just identified. So the home advantage is identified separately from team quality, but team quality, so home advantage is absolute. Team quality is relative to a hypothetical team that with quality 0. And I think that I could also make home advantage relative and team quality absolute probably, but that's not what I've done.
And then Jamin asks, why not expand the league for next season? So have the teams get promoted from the division below and no relegation, and then double the number of relegation places next season.
Yeah, that was one option that was proposed by the Dutch Soccer League. Then the number of matches would increase from 306 to 380, so that is 74 additional matches. And mayors in the Netherlands were against that, because that means more pressure on policing and well, public safety concerns. So they were not in favor of that. Neither were Dutch railways. So
okay.
that was quickly. So for practical purposes, it was. But then we don't know how next season will be played, and we'll see. But for next season, so that cannot start before September 1st. And then it will be a short season in the optimistic scenario, because there's the Euro 2020 that have become Euro 2021. So leagues have to stop early to prepare for the European tournament. So that also makes it more difficult to accommodate many additional games all of a sudden.
Yep,
a cynical point of view would be just to wait and sit it out and see if any teams in the Eredivisie would go bankrupt.
Yeah, and they could be replaced. Okay, Dennis asks, have you considered using your model to predict the outcome from previously completed seasons as a kind of test for plausibility?
Yeah, it does it reasonably well.
I think it's a good point.
So the answer is yes.
Yeah. Then Daniel Tukia says, in Italy, 90% of the clubs are keen to restart, but the sports minister and more generally the government are reluctant for sports groups to restart their activities.
Yeah, see, so I understand that teams are keen to restart because they lack income. So the problem is liquidity, just financial liquidity of teams. Their source, their cash flow has drained up. But yeah, the ministers have different responsibilities from the teams. Well, as we were chatting before, you can say, well, we test all the players and we devote a lot of infrastructure and time from health officials to making sure that the league can resume. But then there's a cost to that. The regular care is suspended at this moment. So, well, what do you want? And that is more a decision for ministers. Their objective function is quite different.
And football clubs are firms. Firms have a responsibility to provide a safe working space, which I think mitigates that keenness to restart, as I understand in other situations, other places. We have also
there's one. Yeah, and there's one thing that I'm not a lawyer, but that I don't understand fully. According to the rules and regulations of the Dutch League, soccer contracts have to expire on 30th June of a given year and start on the 1st of July of a given year. So the term is fixed. Now, Ajax player Ziyech was transferred to Chelsea for a huge transfer fee, and suppose the league would have resumed in July. What would have happened to Ziyech in that particular instance? So even if the soccer league would say, well, we are not going to enforce that particular rule, Chelsea and Ziyech, We say, yeah, but I'm not going to play no matter what. I'm not going to jeopardize my transfer. Alternatively, Chelsea may say, well, yeah, he can play for Ajax in July, but then there's a new situation and our prospects and our cash flow is different now. So let's renegotiate the transfer fee. So that how this whole transfer system is going to work out with an extended league and contracts between individuals and private parties subject to supervision of these soccer leagues, I don't know precisely. The last time that this was a big issue was in the time of the Bosman ruling, and the leagues did not have a proper interpretation of labor law.
Mm. Yeah, and Jean-Louis Fourie, who's a French statistician who Carl and myself often pit our predictions of scorelines against his. He has scoreline prediction models as well. He's asked, similar to Dennis, about the validating of our procedure. He also asks, are the authorities prepared to accept such procedures as compared to current rankings at the time of the cancellation of matches?
I doubt that, but I could imagine that in the court case between the two teams that were not promoted, such calculations play a role because they indicate quite independent of the probability model that you use, that Den Haag and RKC Waalwijk were about to be relegated, no matter what.
Yeah. And then Craig Teal asks, is there anything in any of the domestic leagues, bylaws, rules, regulations regarding league interruptions and what to do about determining champion, promotion, relegation positions? Do you think? Go on.
I've read the bylaws of the Dutch league and I couldn't find anything. So this is really a new situation.
Yeah, he writes from the US, where obviously there's no promotion and relegation, and obviously it begs the question whether there may now be laws written into rule books to ensure the completion of seasons in these kinds of situations.
I'm sure that there will be, an addendum to the bylaws in this case.
Well, I understand that the Football League in England changed a regulation that all matches had to be complete by the end of June to potentially enable the season to complete a little bit later. So that's an example of a somewhat unnecessary rule, really. I guess you need to have some kind of demarcation between the seasons written down somehow. But they apparently amended that for that purpose. That's all the questions to do with the chat. So I think if people want to unmute their mics and ask questions, we can have a period of open discussion, Q&A, if anyone wants to ask any further questions of Ruud or indeed myself.
Hi, James. Hi, Ruud. It's Stefan here. I couldn't join the chat function, so I had to do it over the mic. One thing is, why should we think that the first 2/3 of the season are a good guide to the last third of the season, in the sense that we know that there's a difference in resources amongst the teams, and rich teams have deeper benches than poorer teams, and towards the end of the season, injuries accumulate, so we should expect some gaps to emerge between the strong teams and the weak teams that wouldn't be captured in the first 2/3 of the data.
Yes, that's a fair point. But the simulation approach would allow your more dynamic probability model. So if you make such a model, it could be easily implemented in this simulation approach. And I have not done anything with dynamic data, although I'm in the past I have looked at moving average of performance, if you want. So that would be maybe a bit of dynamics in there, that didn't help much in predicting match outcomes, but I could look into that further. Yes, thank you.
Well, my suggestion would be, there are, as James mentioned, there are lots of models out there predicting. I produced my own one, which I put online a couple of weeks ago. James, you should organize a contest amongst these different models. As you said, you can validate this against previous seasons. Let's see which models work better. I think it would be really interesting to set up that competition.
I very, very much agree. There's an M3 competition for macroeconomic forecasting, so maybe we should have our own sporting forecast competition. When there's some data to compare against, of course, when there's some actual matches.
Well, I think, you take the last 5 seasons.
You could do that.
Let's see which models work best. I'm genuinely interested. My view is that the simple model where you just take the rate, it's just the difference in the valuation of the teams, which you can just use transfer marked. That's almost as good as any statistical model that you can produce. But I'm interested in how close it is. I think you can do a bit better, but I don't think most of these models do very much better. And it's also interesting to think in relation to the betting odds, because it's good to think about how reliable the betting odds are. So I think it would be a worthwhile exercise for all of us.
The fundamental point is the one you made, which is that any forecast method is extrapolating from some set of data that's observed to some data that's not been observed. And you make a very good point about the fatigue effects at the end of a season. Do you have a way of controlling for that in your model, or do you just figure that you're going for a simple rough and ready model rather than something that's too developed?
Well, my view is that the best model is going to be one that just uses 2 pieces of information, really. One is the valuation of the teams, such as transfer mark value, and the second is your form in the last half dozen games or so. And my guess is that the combination of those 2 will beat almost any model that you could produce. But that's a speculation. I'd like to see that tested in practice.
Yeah, so the model that Carl and I bring in essentially uses ELO ratings to get at team strengths. So we calculate those over a long period of time. We had a little bit of recent information in terms of recent goals scored. So in some respects, we are doing that with the ELO being the substitution for the transfer marked values that you're using. So it'd certainly be very interesting to compare the outcomes. We should work on that.
Yeah.
Any more questions? Anyone else want to offer anything?
Is Stefan going to put up a prize for that competition?
Well, sure. Okay. All right. I'll put up a prize. I'll take that. I'll take that on. Sorry? Yeah. Okay. I'll put up $1,000 for the best estimates that we can produce. We have to then. We should have a rules committee that establishes what the rules of this contest will be. But you can. I'll stake $1,000 and pay that out to the best set of forecasts that could be produced, subject to an agreement of this rules committee. All right, Dennis?
I was making a joke, Stefan.
I know, but I'm serious. I mean it. You could do it $1,000, right?
Absolutely, but I don't have the time to spend on making a forecast.
Oh, well. So you obviously don't need $1,000 that much.
Okay, so Alex is putting a question in the chat, which is the last games of the season can be tricky ones if there is a non-linearity between team incentives. Say a team has already won the title or a team that fights for relegation.
That's true. That's true, and this does not allow for that. There's no dynamics in the probability. So any outcome, the probability distributions of the outcome is the same at the beginning of the season as at the end of the season, irrespective of incentives. And so Alex has a fair point in that. So that is a weakness of this model. But yeah. On the other end, projecting these dynamic information over what is it, 8 rounds to be played is also not trivial.
Yeah, longer term forecasts are always worse in macroeconomic terms, economic terms, let alone sporting terms. I think Alex also has a paper that he's written himself on outcomes of those kinds of matches. I believe, and he can correct me, in more or less corrupt countries, finding that in more corrupt countries, a team that needs to win does happen to win quite a lot relative to countries that are less corrupt. So these, of course, are all these kinds of quirks and complications that in an ideal world you would certainly bring in. Question for you, Ruud, actually, is you estimate your model just over the current season, which obviously then inhibits you in terms of degrees of freedom. Have you thought about using matches from previous seasons to estimate your model?
Yes, in fact, I want to calibrate this lambda parameter using matches from previous seasons, and that finds the same lambda parameter. So that is not too sensitive. So I could use more longer term seasons. Yes, seasons longer ago. Yeah. But then there's quite a bit of variation. So this Den Haag that is now 17th, I think last season they ended 8th or something. So they had a significant drop in performance despite the appearance of the English success coach Pardew. And now, believe it or not, even though they were about to be relegated,
he pulled off the great escape.
They are not. So as a consequence, the board of this Den Haag wanted to give the bonus to Pardew. So he signed with a bonus. If avoid relegation, then he has avoided relegation, or at least he has been part of it. And now, but he refused that bonus, thankfully. Yeah. But they had a significant drop in performance. So the long matches from previous seasons are contain useful information if there's some stability in performance. But if it is all over the place, then it doesn't help much.
Dennis, were you going to say something?
Be part of the rules committee of Stefan.
So, Ruud, my original question that James translated for you was about the lambda. It seems you have the same lambda multiplying the differences in the home advantage and in the quality, and I wondered why the same lambda as opposed to different lambdas.
Because that is the case that is worked out in this work of Schauberger and Toots. So I guess you can use another lambda for different lambdas for different penalizations. But then that requires a bit more mathematical statistics and programming to get that working.
Okay.
And then the final question comes from Jean-Louis again, which is the Champions League. We've kind of forgotten about the Champions League with our focus on completing all of the individual competitions in different countries. But the Champions League and Europa League still remain incomplete as well. Whether anyone's thought about how to resolve those. Different order of magnitude.
It's more complicated because it requires a lot of traveling, and traveling is. So I think the only way to do anything about Champions League and Europa League would be if it were possible to get teams together and to play an on-site tournament in one location, so that there's no traveling. That's more a restriction than an actual suggestion how to do that.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think that's probably a good point to wrap up. Thank you very much, Ruud, for a really interesting talk, a really interesting discussion. And before we sign off, I want to just advertise that we have a call for papers out. And so if you do want to present in a Rose's seminar in July, August, or at the start of September, please do submit a paper. You can find the link either here on the Teams website, or you can go to Twitter. You can find my Twitter feed, and you can sign up there, or just simply get in touch with me if you want to sign up for a talk. But thank you again. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you also to our Vice Chancellor Robert van der Noort for introducing the talk, and we look forward to seeing you again next week, next Friday. Have a good weekend. Stay safe.
Stay safe.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.